if the Turkish listening audience, if they allow me, and if considering that our participants are professors, are international, so I would like to continue the panel in English. I hope this will be right for you.
Is Aslı Ceylan Öner. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Architecture at Izmir University of Economics. I'm very glad to be the moderator of this session, which is called the Authenticity, How a Symbol is Born. So in order to give you a background for the team, I can say that the cities in our contemporary era is marked by rapid urbanization and global flows. Although globalization has led to the debates on cultural and economic homogenization in cities, this notion was very much challenged with the need for urban authenticity as the asset that attracts people to cities. Authenticity as a concept is mostly attributed to the cultural historic heritage. However, there is a contemporary side to the issue, in which activities related with the creative economy and local production play an important role. In this panel, called Authenticity, How a Symbol is Born, we examine the concept of urban authenticity and its symbolic value in the built cultural and social environment of cities through many distinguished guests. We are going to have Professor Paul Knox from Virginia Tech. We are going to have Professor Andy Pratt from England. We are going to have Erdem Güzelbey, the Deputy Mayor of Gaziantep. We are going to have Bülent Kösten, who is the City Slow Turkey Technical Coordinator. We are going to have Professor Davide Ponzini from Politecnico di Milano. And we are going to have Professor Abdi Güzer from Middle East Technical University. I'm going to introduce the guests as they start their speeches, but let me tell about how we configured the panel. We have 6 guests, as you can see, and the topic is kind of in between, to be very theoretical oriented, and it needs to be supported by case studies. So the approach that we are going to be taking is going to be, first we are going to lay out the theoretical framework with Professor Knox's and Professor Pratt's presentations. Then we are going to look at some case studies from Gaziantep and Izmir. And then we are going to see what this concept of globalization is actually leading in the built and social cultural environments of cities. Then we are going to have a wrap-up presentation. I hope this is okay, and I hope you enjoy the panel. So our first speaker will be Professor Paul Knox. Professor Paul Knox is a university distinguished professor. He is the Dean of the Honors College and former Dean of the College of Architecture and Urban Studies at Virginia Tech in the United States. He's a member of the editorial board of 7 international journals, including Environment and Planning A, Journal of Urban Affairs, Environment and Planning C, and he has authored many, many books. Among his books are Better by Design, Architecture, Urban Planning, and the Good City, Metroburbia, The Anatomy of Greater London, Palimpsests, Cities and Design, Small Town Sustainability, and Metroburbia USA. It is my biggest pleasure to welcome Professor Paul Knox, and his speech will be called Symbolism and Authenticity in the Built Environment. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ceylan. It's very kind of you. Good afternoon, everyone. In the interest of time, I'm a little bit nervous about the 12 minutes. So I'm going to read from a script and share my screen as I do that. So let me just share my screen. And I'll begin. I'm not so sure about the theoretical. I'm going to make some general observations and sort of high-level generalizations, I think. beginning with a particular example that I'll come back to. Earlier this year, UNESCO stripped Liverpool waterfront of its World Heritage status because recent developments had led, quote, to serious deterioration and irreversible loss to the area's outstanding universal value, along with significant loss to its authenticity and integrity. And I'm not getting, there we go. So what happened in Liverpool has been happening around the world regardless of UNESCO heritage status. It points us to some very important attributes of the built environment. Sociologist Thomas Gearin has emphasized that buildings stabilize social life. They give structure to social institutions, durability to social networks, persistence to behavior patterns, and what we build solidifies society against time and its incessant forces for change. Brick and mortar resist intervention and permutation as they accomplish a measure of stasis. Nevertheless, he recognizes buildings don't just sit there imposing themselves, they're forever objects of reinterpretation, narration, and representation. The built environment then is social history in material form, the product of economic, social, and technological forces, the legacy of successive phases of historical development and of the prevailing sensibilities of the time. Buildings are simultaneously both outcome and shaper of political, cultural, and socioeconomic forces, produced through the interdependent evolution of economic organization, political and institutional structures, market forces, technological innovations, and social movements. As a result, ideology, religion, class, race, and citizenship are all implicated in the socio-spatial dialectic, and are changing attitudes towards race, the role and status of women, public and private spheres of life, mechanisms of social control, and norms of taste and distinction. The built environment is the legacy of all of these forces, collections of material artifacts laden with symbolic meaning. And this, of course, has long been recognized. Arthur Dunn, writing over 100 years ago, noted that every townhouse, every manor, every castle, every church contains crystallized in its walls social influences from the various periods of the past. And then Lewis Mumford, urban historian and all-round 20th century public intellectual, observed in the first of his magisterial surveys of urbanization that, quote, in the state of building at any period, one may discover in legible script the complicated processes and changes that are taking place within civilization itself. But the academic literature on the symbolism of the built environment tends to distinguish three facets of symbolic meaning: syntactical, pragmatic, and semantic. So syntactical symbolism is the meaning that an element of the built environment acquires by virtue of its location in relation to other elements. So, for example, the castle on the hill overlooking the town. Another example that's easy would be London's Victorian school board buildings, so-called sermons in brick, standing out in high relief against the general background of cramped terraced housing, much of which has been demolished now, so they stand alone, like this example. Pragmatic symbolism carries the meaning that's understood in relation to the intentions of the architect, the client, or the social group at the time of building, and is often cast as part of an aestheticized architectural discourse. And semantic symbolism refers to the meanings acquired intentionally or not because of the norm, idea, or attitude that a building represents or designates. So Liverpool's Albert Docks, for example, are emblematic of perhaps British imperial trade. Or from another perspective, They're perhaps emblematic of Britain's involvement with the slave trade. Laden with layers of semantic meaning, everyday built environments amount to moral landscapes that tend overall to reaffirm dominant values. But in practice, it turns out that syntactical, pragmatic, and semantic symbolism often exist together. Different facets of the symbolism associated with a particular building. This is why authenticity is such an elusive concept, especially when applied to something as complex as cityscapes. Economist Virginia Postrel has pointed to three common interpretations of authenticity. First is authenticity as purity, the original form of something, natural and functional. Second is authenticity as tradition, grounded in custom. And third is authenticity as aura, as witness to the wear and tear of adjustments resulting from the passage of time. There's also the idea of authenticity as referential, relating to or honoring some other period. And this is the product of the post-industrial shift towards an experience economy based on the commodification and mediated memorability of places and events. And of course, this is what got Liverpool in trouble. Flagship projects, iconic buildings, monumentality in urban design, and the creation and marketing of cultural quarters have all been seen as necessary for cities that want to compete in the post-industrial economy. In many cases, municipal strategies based on the promotion of culture and design have been encouraged by the plausibility of Richard Florida's prescriptive ideas about the importance of attracting and retaining a creative class that's held to be pivotal to innovation, economic vitality, and urban competitiveness. The implication is that if cities don't make strong efforts to establish the right environment for creative workers, they'll fall behind. Attracting the creative class apparently means, in addition to promoting tolerant, diverse, and open communities, having authentic historical buildings along with walkable streets, street art, and street culture with experiential intensity, as well as vibrant cultural quarters with first-rate galleries and museums. The result is that many cities have been imagineered by developers, planners, and mayors in a collective echo chamber in which fast policy transfer takes place on the back of traveling ideas about urban design and development. But the more that developers, planners, and mayors have sought to provide distinctive settings, and the larger and more spectacular their projects, the more inauthentic the result. The more the built environment is overwritten by generic structures and settings, the more valued the remaining structures and settings become. The more people's patterns of consumption converge, the more fertile the ground for countercultural movements, the more universal the diffusion of material culture and lifestyles, the more local and ethnic identities are valued. The faster the information highway takes people into cyberspace, the more they feel the need for a subjective setting they can call their own. And the faster their neighborhoods and towns acquire the same supermarkets, filling stations, shopping malls, industrial estates, office parks, luxury towers, the more they feel the need for enclaves of familiarity, centeredness, and identity. So UNHCR is a long quote. I won't read it out in the interest of time. They identified this some time ago. And this, of course, is what has driven the heritage industry. And as the UNCHS predicted, it's made cities vulnerable to a debasing and trivializing process. As they put it, local identity becomes an ornament, a public relations artifact designed to aid marketing, and authenticity is then paid for, encapsulated, mummified, located, and displayed to attract tourists rather than to shelter continuities of tradition or the lives of its historic creators. And so Liverpool's waterfront is perhaps just one example of this. Thank you.
Paul, you did right 12 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation, and thank you for putting the concepts of authenticity and the symbol together for us. And we're going to build on this. The second speaker that I would like to invite is Professor Andy Pratt. Andy is an internationally acclaimed expert on the topic of the cultural industries. He's the Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and an academician of the Academy of Social Sciences. He has held academic appointments at University College London, Bartlett School of Planning, and London School of Economics, King's College London. He joined City University as a professor of cultural economy in 2013, and he specializes in the analysis of the cultural industries in the US, Europe, and Japan. He has developed employment definitions in this cultural economy sector that were used as standard measures by UNCTAD and UNESCO. With this, I would like to welcome Professor Andy Pratt, and his speech will be Role of Creativity in Authenticity in a Rapidly Urbanizing World. Andy, the floor is yours.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Let me share my screen with you so that you can see, hopefully. Right. Okay, so a slightly different title, but just a different inflection of that. I want to carry on with some of the issues that Paul was raising, perhaps at a slightly different scale, but focusing on the role of art, particularly, and art and culture in this process. And just to, again, link to what Paul was saying about, if we're talking about UNESCO World Heritage Sites, if we think about the town of Matera in southern Italy, also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is also linked to a film location. And of course, the contemporary film James Bond, No Time to Die, is also has a few scenes there. This neatly links us into this point about representation and place, and the role that representation plays in movies, etc. as well. So that's an issue that I'll come back to. But I guess the more general point in relation to what Paul was saying is in terms of this tendency towards homogenization and the response from cities, of course, to be heterogeneous, to be different in some way. And we see this, but rather unsuccessfully. I've put these logos on there. I Love New York is, of course, the first and the best known of these. But I just took some examples from around Europe of this similar idea of trying to differentiate cities in a global world. And black and red seems to be a little bit similar. The sort of notion of using the city name and into some phrase also seems to be. So my point is that this is a very difficult balance between homogeneity and heterogeneity. Homogeneity means that you can brand and be known as a brand, but then again, how do you make yourself different if everybody's using the same logos or same variety of logos in this way? So there are limitations and there are problems with this process. Sorry, I'm just trying to... and I guess the response here is the way that not just cities, but the way that artistic and creativity has been deployed and used to try to bring this sense of difference and experience back. And I think it's very interesting. We can see architects and designers such as Olaf Eliasson, who famously converted the Turbine Hall of Tate Modern, a vast hangar-like space, into the Weather Project. But anyway, he was focused on a whole range of projects that are at a grand scale, but about making people feel different about the space that they're in. And I think this is a theme that I just want to point out in a way that is interesting, that public art has also recognized this challenge of, in the sort of post-representational period, contemporary art, basically, of the struggle to mark yourself out as different, when everybody can do everything, in a sense. You can take a picture and it appears to be the same. How do you make something different, particular? You add different meanings to it. So issues about public art, and particularly the way that public art breaks down the divisions between production and consumption, audience and producer. Doesn't mean that they're the same, but it creates a dialogue. So there's a potential for participatory activity here, and also the recognition that there's a differentiation of meanings in this way. And to an extent, artists are about creating liminal spaces. So they're the spaces that are neither here nor there, somewhere in between, which there's a possibility of shaping them in some way. And the big trend in most contemporary art now is to be site-specific. So these are really interesting things in terms of this rather abstract idea of contemporary art and some of the ideas driving that. But I would suggest that we can learn a lot from them in terms of what cities try to do in terms of their activities. Sometimes not all that successfully. If we just look to the left here, Paul mentioned Pine and Gilmore's idea of the experience economy. And I think we're seeing all sorts of interesting and perhaps scary overlaps between the experience of retailing, shopping these days, and the way that that merges in some way with history. And you get these strange things, which are museums, which are, in a sense, all shop and little museum, rather than a museum with a little shop at the entrance. And this merging of the two is not just one of a rather generalistic statement in this way, is that the very techniques of display that in museology have been used in museum design, etc., we're now finding in shops. And so this is about audience engagement, because people don't go to shops anymore unless they're encouraged to. So there are some interesting elements here about the experience. But of course, I guess, and here's another link to the way in which these images are used to get people to engage in tourism and these issues about tourism and culture and creativity. And so this idea, if the movement between passive consumption and active consumption is one of the axes that we're seeing changes here, and also the shifts or the balance between high culture and everyday culture. And there are the labels that are in that diagram there suggest different ways that people have tried to differentiate this moving field of tourism and creativity and heritage, etc. But the main message is this shifting between the passive and the active, and the the high culture and everyday culture. And I think seeing shopping as, or even the animation of public spaces in cities, which invariably is the case, is how we're seeing this play out at the moment. Let me just move back, as another element that Paul mentioned in his presentation was about symbolism in this way. And if we go back to some of the earliest writings of particularly people like Theodor Adorno and the Frankfurt School, and they were very concerned with trying to understand what it is, the link between the object and our experience of it. And they talked about this notion of the aura that surrounded the art, which made it special, and the uniqueness of it. But it's really interesting in a way, and the little picture on the right-hand side there is an example of the Mona Lisa in the Louvre Gallery in Paris. And the aura of the Mona Lisa is unfortunately a little bit diluted by all the people taking selfies in front of it. it's really important to step back sometimes and see the real experience of our consumption of culture in this way. Clearly, there were roles for art in terms of society to be about providing higher values in some way, and about whether those are the values of just the elite or the greater public. But nevertheless, this strand of problematic, if you like, between art and accepted meaning is an important message that runs through these. And as Paul mentioned, often cities are trading on what they hope are fixed meanings. But of course, as I've suggested, these meanings are actually quite slippery and they move. And in fact, just to emphasize this point a step further, the Mona Lisa example is one where, in a sense, there's high art on the wall and we all think it's wonderful and we stand back as an audience from it. Art practice is all about, at the moment, about engaging with participation. An engagement in the art in some way. And the late 20th century, there's almost an idea about what people call in the theatre of breaking the fourth wall. That is the imaginary wall between the audience and the stage. And, can you be more involved, the audience more involved in the painting, in the representation in some way. And so this shift towards the shifting of meaning, and also that if you make it site-specific, that actually you resist this idea of mass reproduction of culture. That because it can only happen in this place at this time, and that is what adds to its uniqueness in this way. So again, this is another message of challenging the homogeneity. You get heterogeneity through making something very, very, very specific, and the uniqueness comes out of that, and also the uniqueness of the interaction with the art. And this points us to a really interesting dimension of the way that people think about aesthetics and meaning and representation. Rather than being fixed and intrinsic, there is a move towards what is referred to as relational aesthetics. And so it's the juxtaposition of one thing to another. And of course, coming back to the points that Paul made, in terms of city design, we can see the way that the standard map plan of the city as an ideal form has been challenged by the way that cities have developed over time, and this juxtaposition between a new object and an old object changes the meaning of both, for good or ill. And of course, the Liverpool waterfront is a good example of that. So art is becoming a resistant subject. It's not being well behaved, in a sense, as audiences are meant to be. And I think what's interesting, this participatory role of art, is the way that art actually has come to play quite a significant role in urban redesign and animation. The more there is this desire to create uniqueness, to create unique spaces or unique experiences, which will sort of challenge the erasure of meanings that we often associate with globalization and global forces. However, this curation process, just as if you were in a gallery, also has to be engaged with at the city level. And arguably, I suppose, this is what architects and planners have been doing for a while. But maybe the degeneration of that skill, sublimated to property developers, has meant that we need artists to come back to cities to deal with our public spaces and to really invest them with meaning again. But the issue is that how do you engage with the audience? The audience in this case is the public, the public of cities. Yeah, and how does their voice matter? How do they get involved? And all these tensions between residents and visitors we see as a standard problem here. So just to finish up, I think we are struggling with representation, the different ways in which things can be represented. We have a standard idea that what you see is what you get, but we're increasingly seeing the way that there's a two-way interaction between the symbols of a city and the people in that city. And I guess this is represented in an idea about who is the city that you're trying to represent. Of course, it's made up of thousands or millions of people. What about all the differences that they encapsulate? Can you simply have one symbol or one representation for that city? So this is the issue that I guess I want to throw out there, is that there are still ideas and still opportunities coming from art and culture that I think we can engage with at the city level, which could significantly challenge this domination of a sort of globalized same representation of cities, if we would give art and culture a space rather than simply use it in an instrumental way and say, okay, we'll put this statue or this piece of artwork in a public place, which is a very bland and boring way of engaging with culture and art and cities. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. We have been exposed to many different ideas in terms of cities and the art, the public art. It's changing. It's very much changing. And yes, cities are trying to create heterogeneity through making different things, through making something very specific. And home is a city. Who is the audience that we are really engaging with are important issues. And creating authenticity has a multi-layer aspect. Well, now let's talk to two Turkish cases. First one will be from Gaziantep. Maybe you know Gaziantep. We all know it very well in Turkey. But Gaziantep is known as the gourmet city of Turkey because they have delicious cuisine. So today we are lucky to have the Deputy Mayor of Gaziantep, Erdem Güzel Bey. Welcome, Deputy Mayor. Hoş geldiniz. Sizi aramızda görmekten mutluyuz.
Merhabalar. Erdem Güzel Bey.
Hi, it's a pleasure to see you here. Hi, Erdem Güzel. I am an architect working at Gaziantep Metropolitan Municipality. And as for this meeting about the authentic cities, yes, it is a great opportunity to give voice to ideas. Thank you for this enjoyable session. No, thank you. Of course, I would like to introduce Gaziantep very shortly, as it has actually an history of 10,000 years, dating back to 8,000 year before century. And we see actually no disruptions in terms of the city's operations. And actually, it is the ninth oldest city in terms of continuous urban activities as reported by the Telegraph. And we see Aleppo or Damascus, Baghdad in Iraq, which are continuously in chaos. But Gaziantep preserved its identity as a city. Of course, we're talking about a city which hosted civilizations, and everything is reflected in its culture and food and nutrition style. And I would like to actually share this quote by Ömer Hayyam, who says every city has a character. The people of a city actually gets coalesced with the newcoming people. The newcomers adapt to the city's characteristic as well. And that's what we see in Gaziantep. So it's like the city always catches up with this zeitgeist. That's why this motto of our city is actually about gastronomy and food items. That's why we put actually the gastronomy to the forefront. Here, this has been on a national scale first, and then on an international scale. And in 2015, we joined UNESCO's Creative Cities Network. And after our inclusion in this network, we carried on our efforts accordingly, and modernization, modern city, or globalization, as addressed by other speakers, are actually about preserving your identity. As with globalization, everything has become sort of identical, and here your authenticity comes with preserving your identity and values. I think that's the biggest difference, and our biggest difference is that we have been able to preserve this historical identity. There's this Karkamış ancient city dating back to 6,000 years, 6,000 to 1,000 years before century, the Hittite period. And here we actually see wheat and ground table and other depictions. When you move on to Zeugma, this is about a border city established by the generals sent by Alexandria, close to the Euphrates. So here, food and beverages are also depicted on the grounds and walls. We see depictions of fish, for example. Again, this is a depiction of the daily eating practices, and that is a continuous process in Gaziantep as we know it today. So we say that we have our living spaces and houses. Actually, cities have their venues and living spaces too. There are, for example, streets in a city. They represent the houses of the city, and the special communication enables us to have a continuous engagement and communication. People's continuous movements on the streets are a sign of it. And gastronomy has started to adopt specific edges being included in certain groups. We encourage that, and we pay attention to cooperatives. For example, women's cooperatives are established in city so that we can exhibit our food items, and the culture is actually has food items as an integrated part. We talk about chefs. We didn't hold it this year, but in 2019 we had 1 million visitors, and we have been holding it since 2017. These Michelin star chefs use our garlic, thyme, pepper, pistachio, and present completely new dishes. Also, if we have a chef from Spain, Germany, or Japan, they have their own interpretations. Also, other chefs from countries like Slovenia. So these chefs actually come up with a new interpretation of the materials. They make their presentations, and these flavors are then shared with people. And we actually try to derive something authentic, which meets with the new, which meets with the present as we know it. We have our Directorate General of Agriculture, who manages these many cooperatives, and then we form our neighborhood cuisines. Also, for Down syndrome children, we create social kitchens, cuisines. For example, they serve as waiters there. They work as waitresses there and serve food to the community. So that's how we also hold social events. And with small investments and movements, we try to increase its impact value. And we have accomplished things there. So this shows that touching everyone's life, being present there, is a uniting actually element. The more we touch those people's lives, the better our unity is, because these are the flavors that put us together. And here the new things should actually have the history as a baseline, as a reference point. That's how we approach it. I think our city has made significant progress, especially the gastronomy festivals attracted keen interest from people. That would be all from my side in general terms. Thank you very much, dear Deputy Mayor. Really, Gaziantep's cuisine, Gaziantep's culture are well appreciated by all of us as a unique value, and we can see how much it contributes to Gaziantep. Thank you for your kind efforts. No, thank you. Now, I would like to refer to another case study from Turkey. We'll go to Izmir.
So, in the very recent year, Izmir has launched. Sorry, ben de herhalde. Okay. Izmir has launched a very recent initiative. We all know about slow cities, Città Slow movement. Now Izmir has said that there's something else that is going to be possible, Città Slow metropolis. And in order to explain that, today we're going to have Mr. Bülent Köstem, who is working as the Città Slow Metropole Izmir project coordinator in Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. Mr. Köstem has also been working as the Città Slow Turkey Technical Coordinator since 2009. He works in the fields of project development, local development, civil society, city and slowness. In 2011, he was among the founders of the Association for Supporting Slow Life and served as the chairperson. He was also one of the founders of the Roma Community Youth Education and Development Association as well. Mr. Köstem still supports non-governmental organizations as a mentor in the Social Incubation Program for Local Participation, run by Istanbul Bilgi University Social Incubation Center. He has worked in the private, public, and civil society sectors as well. Mr. Köstem has managed the candidacy process of 18 slow cities in Turkey and 4 cities in the TRNC. With this, I would like to welcome Mr. Bülent Köstem, and the title of his speech will be Slow Metropolis, Is it a New Frontier, The Case of Izmir. Hoş geldiniz Bülent Bey.
Teşekkürler, sağ olun. Öncelikle organizasyon evi.
I would like to thank everyone for their kind contributions to the organizations. I will be telling you about the Città Slow philosophy and the metropolis version of it in Izmir. Città Slow dates back to 1999, established by 4 municipalities, and now 278 cities are involved in this network of over 100 countries, and the main purpose here is to create a city with better living conditions, and another goal is to support cities concerning the risk of losing identity in the face of globalization. Here we can talk about cities that preserve its culture and civilization, provide a comfortable living area, preserving local differences, and supporting microeconomy in a resilient way while feeling responsible towards its local districts as well as the rest of the world. To spread this philosophy, there is this international science committee established by the association, whereby the urban administrations will create a roadmap, and they set 72 criteria here. Mr. Paul Marx is also a part of this science committee. These criteria include quantitative ones like the cleanliness of water, climate, etc. And here, as for the qualitative sides, we can talk about increased local production. However, when you look at these criteria, you see that they do not target creating standardized or same cities. Actually, it aims to ensure that these cities meet these criteria based on their own conditions. And this is inaudible to your interpreter due to technical issues. So they restore cities, buildings, and give that to, for example, local representatives. And here they try to remember their local tastes. They try to revive arts activities, and here they are part of the international community, and they benefit from a network. Actually, when we say Chitaslav, this doesn't mean going back to old times or being backwarded. Actually, we started in Chitaslav Metropole, and here the philosophy is to ensure that this philosophy is adapted to metropolitans with the partnership of Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. And here Izmir will be the first Chitaslav Metropolitan City. I think adaptation of these concepts may not be appropriate, as this concept was developed for towns with 50,000 people and lower populations, so it is not possible to just adapt it. Ensure that the lifestyle in metropolitans are improved, and this is not just for the people living there, it's for all of us. The big cities will continue to grow as the urban population will be higher than the agricultural population or rural population, and their problems will grow too. So this Chitaslav concept actually concerns not just the metropolitans but the entire world, and we want to sit down in slow towns, and we cannot just sit down in slow towns and shy away from unhappy developments. Therefore, considering that metropolitans play a major role in terms of arts and other activities, we should ensure that metropolitans come together, and we provide an alternative to a fast consumption pattern. When we started our activities, we first looked at the applications there to understand what they do: habitat meetings, World Happiness Index, green cities, and other indices provided input. Then we met with 60 stakeholders to ask them what the issues are in the metropolitan municipality. We try to understand what can be done for these problems, and then we ensured that the outputs overlap with the Chitaslav philosophy, and we determined main working areas, including the strengthening of the community, good governance, mobility, access to good food, so urban resilience, and Chitaslav neighborhoods. These were the main categories. We also determined draft criteria, but we need an integrated model so that we can apply it to all the cities' long-term goal. And here scientists, civil society, municipal people, and other stakeholders should also be a part of this international activity. That's why we are working with an international working group, and that's not enough either. There are different metropolitans from different cities, and we also want to obtain their opinions, views and opinions. That's why we're going to probably hold a big metropolitan municipalities workshop while working with academics from different disciplines serving at different universities. These are our main headings, and we want to form working groups based on those headings. We want to ensure the spawn of such a concept. We have to do it. We see great metropolitan city examples as they are governed well, but we cannot say that the life is headed in a great direction in those cities either. These issues actually are experienced by all of us. it impacts all of us, and fast consumption focused understanding will not be able to come up with solutions. We need a different approach. So rather than size and speed, we need a calmer approach. Last but not least, let me tell you what we have been doing so far. We have two legs in these activities. First, we try to create a set of criteria or a model that can be applied, as in the case of Chittaslow, for these metropolitans, and we are at the beginning of it. Second, we want to develop this calm neighborhood concept, which can be injected to the metropolitan in all its areas. And here we want to ensure that even in Istanbul, we have streets that actually meet the needs of people and allow for interaction between them. And we want to do it together with the residents of those neighborhoods. In doing so, we want to ensure that all our efforts are scientific, transparent, and measurable. We try to measure everything indeed. For example, we have a pilot neighborhood. We check whether those people feel secure as they walk during the nighttime, so that we can see the sort of adjustments we can make. We look at the number of people using public transportation. We look at the number of people commuting to their homes and schools by foot. And here, the general goal of the framework here is to ensure that we have permanent changes. We want to ensure that we have more interactive, healthier, and safe neighborhoods with a sense of belonging, so that we have multiple functions in the public domain in line with people's needs and requirements. We have seen its importance in the pandemic times. So until June, Chittaslow summit, we want to increase mobility and visibility, and also improve public spaces with participation of people. And we have determined indicators to measure that change. As I stated earlier, we for example, check the amount of walking trail, or for example, bicycle route, etc., or what have been done to measure interaction, increased interaction. And as we define those public spaces, we pay attention to the needs and requirements of the neighborhood residents. If you want to have a park area, for example, at a particular point, what purpose will that park serve? Young children, teenagers, how the residents of that neighborhood use it. We will also identify the physically challenged, women, the elderly. We will document actually the sort of interactions that have been experienced throughout this process. And we created a toolbox that look at such interferences. One of them concerns the projects and activities of municipalities, and also our interferences or interventions. Some of them are physical, some of them are mental. As professors stated, society and city influences each other in a physical and mental way. In order to ensure a permanent change, we need to work on both, and we have to ensure that we need to and we analyze the behaviors of the residents of the neighborhood. Otherwise, when you're in the dark, you cannot make permanent changes. For example, you create a bicycle road, but people cannot use it. Why? Because they cannot ride a bicycle, or they are not aware of it, or do they think they will sweat when they use it, or don't they know where to park their bicycles, or don't they know how to integrate bicycle into social life? We need to know all of them so that we can ensure a behavioral change there. So we want to ensure that neighborhoods reaches basic needs and services in a healthy way, After seeing the implementation of this model, we want to spread it across Izmir. So we want to prevent non-participation of people where we have issues that are not well identified. We want to ensure a long-term impact. I try to speak fast so that I cannot keep up with the time limit. Hopefully, I've been able to explain it well. Thank you very much for complying with the time limit, Mr. Blunt. It is quite exciting that you referred to such a formation in Izmir. We also look forward to the sort of adoptions we'll see in the world. As academics, we wish you all the best because you have come up with a huge concept. It is going to be a very interesting process ahead as we observe how it proceeds. Now, English.
Okay, I think I'm okay. One more. I'm not going to say case study, but something that can be seen as a case to the impact of globalization on built environment and how different cities are embracing this notion of globalization in their built environment, yet trying to become different with different architectural strategies, design strategies, planning strategies, how they are trying to make themselves known in the notion of the global city literature. That's an interesting topic that we thought that needs to be integrated into this panel, because the notion of globalization is very much challenged by the notion of authenticity. Yes, yet globalization is producing its iconic developments. It has its symbolic meaning, and its reflections on the built environment is very important. So with this, I'm going to invite Professor Davide Ponzini, and let me introduce Davide. Davide Ponzini is Associate Professor of Urban Planning at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. He is the Director of the Transnational Architecture and Urbanism Research Unit. He has also been a visiting scholar in many universities, including Yale, Johns Hopkins, Columbia University. His research activity focuses on planning theory, urban and cultural policy, and contemporary architecture. He has been the director and co-director of research projects, among which the Learning from Gulf States initiative regarding urbanization in the Arabian Peninsula. Currently, he is the research leader of the JPI Cultural Heritage Research Project. He has been an advisor of both urban and cultural policy to local and national governments and other public and private entities. Davide's talk will be about transnational architecture and urbanism between homogenization and differentiation. With this, I would like to welcome Davide, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaylan. Thank you for the invitation and the quite generous introduction. I will share the slides I prepared for this speech. I guess you now can see the first slide full screen. The topic I will talk about shifts back the attention to the built environment and urban transformation processes as they occur transnationally. I am going to discuss in particular this homogenization, differentiation, interaction. Most of what I'm going to say derives from a book I recently published, Transnational Architecture and Urbanism, Rethinking How Cities Plan, Transform, and Learn. So I was asked to inject some examples and case studies in the discussion, and I would start from here. I'm not sure if Andy or Paul can identify this building. I am pretty sure some of you is familiar with this kind of building. Whatever you had in mind, the second question is it and where is it? So this is a way to introduce what I mean by transnational architecture and urbanism to say that those two buildings, in fact, came about as icons for two very different situations into global cities. The explanation I give is that they are not by chance that they look one like the other. The same architect, namely Cesar Pelli, the same developer, and the same functions, the same heights and architectural features resurfaced then. Of course, there are a number of other examples. You will find some of them in my book. But the point I want to make is that the problem is not the building itself, but how it sits in its context. Here you see that it's not only the building that looks alike, or they look alike one another, but the whole business districts tend to resemble one another and tend to homogenize. And at the top of this slide, you also see the number of projects completed by the firm around the world. Of course, I do not assume they all look like another, but it's a matter of explaining how players like the architect I mentioned, as well as the developers, travel and deliver their work around the world. This, of course, gives a big push to homogenization, but as I will argue, one needs to see it in place in order to understand how it works and how it, in a way, interacts with differentiation. I will concentrate very briefly with a few cases with matters of spectacularization, of transfer of projects like the one I mentioned, and of homogenization. In the third point, I will provide some takeaway messages from basically the book and the examples. Scholars in the urban planning, urban geography fields explained why contemporary cities in a way tend to homogenize, and provided general theories about this, the general explanations about this, basically arguing about why cities have skyscrapers like the one I showed that look one like the other, business districts that look one like the other, waterfront redevelopments, and museums, and so on and so forth. I think that those explanations are very important to have a general understanding of urban transformation. But first, they depict cities as doomed, as trapped in processes of homogenization. And second, they do not always explain how this happens. I think this is more urgent to shift the attention from general theories to more specific explanation of how these projects homogenize or distinguish cities that want, in fact, to stand out in the international panorama. This is an example of a spectacle. It is the tallest building in the world. It's the Burj Khalifa, 800 plus meter high building, and designed by an international firm called SOM. Of course, if you look closely to this photograph, as many of the pictures in this presentation by photographer Michele Anastasi, you will also see another record-breaking element, which is the Dubai Fountain, which it's the largest chorograph fountain in the world, and has quite tall water chutes, and so on and so forth. Every day you can attend to light, music, and water chute spectacle at the foot of the building that you see at the center of the picture. Take selfies, enjoy public space, and if you look to the right-hand side, enter the largest retail mall in the world, Dubai Mall, namely. And of course, this is part of the same development and the same rationale of spectacularization of the environment. My point is that concentrating too much into spectacle and consumption may detract attention to other parts of the city. This is just a few kilometers away from the building that you see, the Burj Khalifa that you see to the right-hand side. And basically, these are sort of leftover spaces waiting for development and not very much equipped for people to enjoy and use. Of course, this is an extreme example from the Persian Gulf region. but I see how the buildings get spectacularized similarly in many other parts of the world, including the Western world. This is the tallest building in the United States, you see on your right-hand side, and seen from Brooklyn towards Manhattan. Not far from the building I started with designed by Cesar Pelli. And again, this is Hong Kong, similarly having selfie moments when buildings and lasers and lights, in a way, present the city as a spectacle. I see this as something that is quite recurring. I concentrate my attention to two similar buildings designed by the same architect, Jean Nouvel, the one at the center and the one to the right, in two very different situations, namely Barcelona and Doha. The buildings have some similitudes and, of course, many differences, among which most notably the height. Doha is taller, of course, as in this part of the world, the tendency is to go up high. And of course, they are part of, as I mentioned for Cesar Pelli, of a number of projects of a quite large firm that works internationally and historically grew from Europe to the Western world and finally to the Middle East and Far East as well. This picture at the top, Barcelona at the bottom, to the left, Barcelona to the right, Doha, also show how buildings, in a way, are used and tend to try to send out a message as a landmark and as an icon. Lighting and colors and other devices are, of course, used. However, the processes that led to these two projects are quite different. In one case, the first is Barcelona. You see here a map with the strategic projects of the 2000s in Barcelona. You see the red dot where the Akbar Tower is a very crucial node for the city, and it's close to two very large redevelopment projects of the node itself, as well as of the surrounding neighborhood called Poblenou. And the building, in a way, while standing at the crossroad of important axes, also is surrounded by a transformation that didn't overshadow its height and visibility from the rest of the city, in a way fit in the planning schemes and development visions that the city of Barcelona set for itself, and particularly for the Poblenou neighborhood, becoming within 10, 12 years quite an epicenter of the then so-called new economy, creative economy in the 2000s. A very different situation is in Doha, where the city is developed basically one project by, it's developed project by project. You see here quite large projects. Number 6 in particular is the new central business district of West Bay, and the use of this, or the attempt at using this iconic building, of course, is confirmed once again by the architectural language of it. However, it is surrounded by similarly spectacular or wannabe spectacular buildings with interesting names. You see the building, the Doha Tower to your left-hand side, covered by a sandwich-shaped tower. Next, you see two palm-shaped towers, the Tornado Tower, and many others in the same neighborhood, where the human scale is quite out of the attention of the planners and designers. Through some analysis, one can also understand that the variety of functions, the connection to public space, are, of course, very different in one case and the other. Despite the speed of this presentation, I guess you understood that the architect alone cannot deliver an icon just by design. It depends on a larger project and process of transformation in the city, and of expertise of many other parties involved in the process. In this sense, I think it's quite delusionary to expect to be able to transfer not so much the building or the type of building, but the iconic power, the iconicity, the ability of being a landmark by design. So this photograph, once again by Michele Anastasi, ironically depicts a piece or part of a piece of public art, realized to your left-hand side, and explains how this is real, and it's hard to distinguish the iconic building in a very crowded lineup. And once again, I stress the fact that this may be an extreme case of, in a way, of difficulty in distinction and finding an authentic icon for the city. But I insist it's not only the matter of Gulf cities. As we go back to the west, you may see to the right-hand side another ogival-like building designed by another famous architect, Norman Foster, namely the Gherkin, nicknamed the Gherkin, the building, together with, to its left, the cheese grater, and again to its left, the walkie-talkie building, and so on and so forth. In this sense, in a way, other cities undergo similar problematic ways of homogenizing. Just to go back and pay further attention to the architect of the two towers, Jean Nouvel, and this leads me to the third point. He claims that every project is different and it cannot be transferred elsewhere. Of course, this was stated not about the Doha Tower, but about another quite important accomplishment of his, namely the Louvre building in Abu Dhabi. It's a very interesting complex. It uses the landscape, the light, the water, and in a way interacts also with some of the views from the tip of this island where it's located. And I must say that this is, on the contrary to other projects, very unique and very connected to context. Of course, it's a totally different type and scale of project. However, the argument is quite simple. If the same architect, roughly working in the same context, may deliver one project that tends to homogenize the urban landscape and another that distinguishes it, of course, we have a problem. And the problem is that the architect alone, once again, cannot do the job alone. And this homogenization and differentiation, in fact, depends on the context. It doesn't depend on the design alone, because the projects themselves cannot really, in a way, even be copied without adaptation and hybridization with certain aspects of the law. I think that this makes a big difference, and this can, in a way, generate, last point, situations that allow for betterment. Maybe not to, in a way, change these processes and tendencies altogether, but for sure to make them better according to place. And this is the takeaway message for policymaker, and basically saying that perhaps it would be very hard to contrast these transnational projects, but at the same time, there are ways to understand them better and to make them better by, once again, connecting them to context, to the actors, and to the different scales where they impact. Concentrate on problems rather than on the narrative of it, of globalization. Creative city was mentioned, of course, smart city today, or sustainability, if oversimplified. And in a way, try to find ways to make sense in the context rather than in general. And with this, I thank you, and I hope this helped the discussion to enrich our work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Davide. So the context, the actors, the political context, those are all the things that needs to be considered in terms of homogenization, heterogenization, examining the homogenization, heterogenization in the built environment. And we can see that in many of the world cities, examining the process is an interesting research stream. With that, I would like to now proceed with our last panelist, Professor Abdi Güzer. Professor Abdi Güzer is a professor in the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, Turkey. He's a lecturer on architectural criticism and a fourth-year design studio manager. Professor Güzer served as the Vice President of METU Department of Architecture, Head of Department of Building Information, Vice Dean, General Secretary, and President of the 1927 Association of Architects. In addition to various jury memberships and architectural design competitions, Professor Güzer won numerous awards and honorable mentions, and many of his projects have been implemented. His research interests include architectural criticism as well as recent architectural concepts and applications, housing and mass housing structures, urban design and urban renovation projects, environmental awareness and sustainability in buildings. He is the founder of CHA Architecture Workshop, which aims to create a research environment related to architecture and design to produce projects. With that, I would like to welcome Professor Güzer, and the title of his presentation will be The Limits of Authenticity in the Age of Post-Truth. Abdi Hocam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen right now? Yes, I think that's okay. Once again, thank you very much. I actually would like to talk about, by coincidence actually, with Paul Knox and with Davide, my presentation will be kind of a follow-up to their presentations. Of course, it's a very important and fundamental subject that we are discussing. A few weeks ago, two of my students, one after another, presented their theses right about this subject. One is about authenticity and the other was about the venue or space. As Paul Knox said, there are 4-5 titles: tradition, form. We can multiply those titles because the city, when we carry the concept of authenticity to the scale of city, it's a very complicated structure. As Erdem mentioned in his presentation, it includes food culture or the ways we consume and produce the city, the structures, the life itself, but rather we are looking from an architectural framework and we see the visible face of the city. We see the buildings together and we see the general lines. But Davide mentioned a very important subject. Actually, he said this is not an issue of one single object or structure. Even though the cities are gaining an identity over those buildings, but it's an issue of context. So all this meaning is created inside a context about authenticity. However, in the physical context can gain authenticity in different ways. As shown earlier, besides what has been shown earlier, a plan typology can become the authenticity of one city, or one single structure can become a representation which can represent the whole city. And indeed, there is accumulation can bring an authenticity. When we show one by one, there will be many structures which will be original, authentic. As we have all underlined, the cities look alike. Even though it seems as if it's very diversified, but when we look from a distance, we see that they're all the same. So I have written the names, but when you look from a distance, in a minute you cannot say which is Dubai, which is Istanbul, or which is London. That is the way of the construction. This is not only in the cities, it's global culture. It's also there in movies, songs, novels. All over the world, a similar consumption is being accelerated. And for this reason, this is not surprising that this is reflected in the cities and architecture. As we have seen here, there's a transformation. On the left side, we thought the changes, differences from the pictures on the left side, but today there is a similarity where we cannot need the differences. Therefore, just like the towers we were talking about earlier, there are certain symbols that reflect the authenticity of the cities. They are being liked and they are being repeated. It could be a very special structure. There are so many Eiffel Towers on many parts of the world. At the same time, the cities change. When you look at Istanbul, as you go from seaside towards the behind, it goes higher, it gets bigger, it gets fatter, the language changes, the structure changes. And finally, there are two main reasons of that. One is modern architecture is about the concept of being the same. And architecture language based on the production is more important. As Jacqueline underlined in the past, it's like a film scene, movie scene. A dream city has become the real city that we live in. Technology is developing. You see? The models of the cars today are very similar. If we do not see the emblems, we will not be able to distinguish them. We are all working at similar places in very similar ways we work. Not only feeling the cities by seeing, looking, feeling, and at the same time, we are getting to know the cities through the knowledge that is produced and through the way how it was transformed. And so the post-truth, the knowledge which was interfered, the knowledge is presented after a modification on intention. But this is not something new, but you know, for very old, since very old times. This has been made by the media for long times, and we have always encountered this approach. However, with the social media and digital environments becoming more important, this has gained a huge acceleration. Within one day, the images, the messages, and the ways that they are circulated in a phone, you will see that this environment is incredible. And there is a new guided cultural environment. Here, there is a very important concept. In a huge, great pluralism, actually many things are being single. I mean, they are being guided, steered from single points. This is the case for consumption and architecture in many other subjects. In my speech, there are three main grounds of architectural criticism. One is academic. We have a small group, we use more references, and we write among ourselves, and actually the architecture is being tried to understood with reference to other disciplines. And And the other end is the way the architecture is discussed in daily life, and in between there is a professional environment. These three cultural environments in today's environment gains different weights, in particular with the pressure, with the domination of the social media. A few days ago, when you write architecture, these are the first comers. Yes, some of them we are familiar with, some of them we do not know. Why they are in the front? We do never know how they are selected. Maybe we are coming from this world, distance to them, but for any individual who does not have this distance, these are the 10 buildings that are important for the architecture. At the end of the day, actually, as the case in the J. Kosinski movie, we are in such a world of ununderstandable messages. We are living in a world guided with the pressure of the media. This is the image circulating in social media. The architect and the designer is Turkish. This is not a real project, but most people think as if it was really done. And the location is known. It's compared with other structures and in an image world. So the image world and the real world can be substituted very easily. And when we look at those cultural differences, we see that within the popular culture, the perception of architecture is totally different. On top, there is a criticism about the urban situation here, but here someone can say that they admire all of those architectural works. This made-up architectural environment is affecting architecture in a very different way. First of all, there is a concept of expert. There's no more a concept of expert or critic, or many people share those adjectives. Some popularities or respect gained in society becomes sufficient to become guiding in certain subjects. Language and descriptions change all of a sudden, and finally, a built structure and the city criticism can be substituted to 1-0 machine language, like dislike, I liked or disliked it, and very easily a system of values is created based on them. So we are facing a substitute information, and the concept of modernity becomes like a fashion. We are experiencing it as if it's a fashion. So the authenticity, or the new concept of authenticity, has a power behind that, and actually these are the people who produce it. There are two very important concepts. One of them is typologic authenticity. Two words. One is typology, which is a repetitive thing. The other is authenticity. In today's environment, these come together. As David mentioned in his presentation, actually a building which is made authentically is turned to something typologic by the architect themselves. And the second concept is tautologic pluralism. Again, two different concepts. Something seems as if it's pluralist. It seems that it's providing us with a variety, but in the background, they are almost the same. The philosophy, the essence, the contribution to the city is the same. Professor, I get a warning from the directors. We are in the last 2 minutes. So this is the wrap-up session, and for this reason I just wanted to give reference to the previous presentations. At the end of the day, this is an issue of language and location. The location comes to us in different ways. The sound of the location or space, and actually an urbanization and architecture originating from the location turns into a different way where the structure building becomes the location itself. Starting to do something despite the location, representing the location, being part of it, identifying the context, or becoming an object, and which can be anywhere, any location, but among all of them, trying to exist inside a context. We can multiply these kind of representations, but we should never forget that all of them are beyond being physical and architectural choices. In the background, they have a complicated multidisciplinary world, and together with economic, ideologic, political problems, they have this situation. So it is representing many disciplinary frameworks, including art, history, etc. And the established reality, built reality, becomes is substituted to a software and application, as we can see. Thank you very much.
Burden, I guess, but thank you very much. As always, it was, I'm looking at it, I have learned a lot. And actually, we cannot take any questions at this time if we cannot accommodate questions, but I can say that every presentation, every talk was so valuable. And I'm sure that, like the people who are watching us would love to hear more. Maybe they can contact you. And I'm thinking, like, even between each other, we have learned a lot, and maybe we should stay in touch, keep in touch about different topics, and maybe look into different collaborations about this topic called authenticity, authentic city, and how a symbol is born. So I thank each and all of you, all of our panel.